Hi, this is Irish Eyes True Crime.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Irish Eyes True Crime. Today I'd like to talk about the experts in rivers brought into the inquest of Nicola Bulley. PC Thackeray, Professor Tipton, Dr. Morgan and Sergeant Denison Wilkins. I'll start with police diver PC Matthew Thackeray from the police's Northwest Underwater Diving Team. PC Thackeray has been a police diver for 8 years. PC Thackeray is describing the scene of the riverbank where Nicky was last seen. He is using a series of photographs to point out the location and the bench where Nicky's phone was found. These pictures were taken to try show the slope down the banking towards the river itself, he says. The images are showing the two areas of sloping, with the second much steeper than the first. PC Thackeray said that although the river level was higher than normal, there was around a 1 metre drop the day Nicky went missing. PC Thackeray describes how there is a man-made river wall constructed of large square bricks on the corner of the river, which he said he presumes has been done to prevent the river banking being worn away. The coroner asks, if you were in the water and trying to climb out, would it be possible to find a foothold on the bricks? PC Thackeray replies, no, not at all. It's very difficult to get out of the water here. The coroner asks, if you have fallen and gone over the edge of the steep section, are you going to stop before you hit the water? PC Thackeray replies, no, you would just go into the water. The distance between where Nicky was last seen and where her body was found is around 1.5 miles, PC Thackeray says. There is nothing to grab hold of to help yourself back out, he adds. We're now watching a video clip filmed on PC Thackeray's body cam, which shows him floating down the river from the bench to where Nicky's body was found. The video shows PC Thackeray starting from the bench, making his way down the banking and climbing into the water. On the floor of the river, we can see a pile of large rocks with sharp edges. The river is about 4 metres deep at this point, the inquest is told. PC Thackeray filmed the footage on Tuesday, April the 4th, 2023. This coincides with the statement issued by Lancashire Constabulary and the coroner after speculation mounted when the divers were spotted having returned to St. Michael's on Wire. PC Thackeray tells the inquest, it's my belief that if she did fall in, she was probably floating and being pushed along the flow. The temperature of the water when Nicky went missing was 4 degrees, says the officer. He adds, if you're not used to it, then entering the water at that temperature would lead to cold water shock. It causes you to gasp and causes your muscles to seize up. PC Thackeray explains that the riverbed does eventually slope up to allow you to stand, but this is approximately 40 metres downstream from where Nicky is believed to have entered the water. It took him 3.5 minutes to get to this location, although he said the speed of the flow was 1 metre per second or 2 knots on the day she disappeared. PC Thackeray says it would be 2 to 3 minutes before the river would bring you to the first point where a person could climb out. That's an awfully long time in cold water, the coroner commented. Around 100 metres from where Nicky is believed to have entered the water, there is a small island. At this point, PC Thackeray is unable to reach the bottom. The river is about 2 metres deep at this location, the inquest is told. PC Thackeray points out some overhanging trees, as he allows the flow of the river to take him downstream. He explains he has done this rather than swim down to illustrate how even when it is moving slowly, the river flow will take someone downstream. His feet still can't touch the bottom. PC Thackeray now discusses a weir. The water flows fast over the weir, and below the weir the river is tidal, he says. He goes on to point out several snag hazards, such as fallen trees and vegetation, which weren't searched by the police when they arrived at the scene and started diving at 4 p.m. on the day Nicky went missing. However, the fire service did search this area in a boat, the inquest is told. PC Thackeray is asked about his experience of deaths by drowning, where the water depth is sufficient to be able to stand up. I have attended a number of deaths where the water is chest deep and with a flat bottom, with no flow to the water. You could avoid drowning by keeping calm and standing up. However, it doesn't happen like that when you are suddenly entering cold water. You gasp and you breathe in water, and these drownings could have been prevented if they had kept calm and kept your head above water. But it's never that simple. In this case, you can't put your foot down. The river was moving, and even if you got to the point of safety, it's difficult to climb out. Sophie Cartwright KC, the barrister representing Nicky's family, is now asking PC Thackeray some questions. He says his advice, if you fall into cold water, is to float. If you try to swim, you are impaired. He says your muscles seize and you tire very quickly. Next up is Professor Mike Tipton from the University of Portsmouth and Dr. Paddy Morgan, who jointly produced a report looking at the mechanism by which a person dies from drowning. They are given evidence together. Professor Tipton has published more than 750 papers on the physiological response to extreme environments such as cold water. Dr. Morgan is a consultant anaesthesiast. He is also medical director of His Majesty Coast Guard. He says he and Professor Tipton lead the world in terms of expertise. Professor Tipton is shown what Nicky was wearing on the day she went missing. He says there was no real protection in the clothing that Nicky was wearing on the day. Water would easily get under the clothing. He goes on to explain that when a person enters cold water, their heart output and blood pressure increases, and they have no control over their breathing. Professor Tipton says the lethal dose of water into the lungs with fresh water is 2 litres. In that first breath for a person of similar weight to Nicky, you would have taken in 1 to 2 litres, so it would only take maybe 1 or 2 breaths to cross the lethal dose. Professor Tipton was asked how a person would respond physiologically to entering cold water. He says, you are absolutely preoccupied with the challenge you are being presented with. Those first seconds in the water, people really aren't considering anything else. We have heard of people talking about routes to grab onto points of safety, but you would not be thinking about that. You are preoccupied with attempting to hold your breath and get back to surface. There is no normal logical cognition going on. You are absolutely distracted, and entering such water is a painfully cold experience. Professor Tipton said at the temperature the river wire was on the day Nicky went missing, a person would lose consciousness within around 25 seconds. It is a very rapid incapacitation, he adds. He explains that it is not solely the exchange of water and oxygen which leads to a person drowning. As well as taking up space in the lungs normally filled with oxygen, the water damages the lungs. The alveoli are collapsing, adds Professor Tipton. Dr. Morgan says that if someone has taken an initial gasp from the cold water shock and then goes underwater, the length of time they would be able to hold their breath is 10 seconds at best, and most likely 1 to 2 seconds. He says that when the lungs damage and/or the amount of water inhaled gets to a certain point, the heart will stop pumping and the brain switches off. Professor Tipton says that if Nikki had fallen in where it is suggested, then there is a very good chance that the initial gasp would have happened under the water, which meant unconsciousness would have been far quicker. Professor Tipton says, in my opinion, given the nature of the likely entry into the water at speed down a steep slope, I think Nikki had a gasp response under the water which initiated the drowning response very quickly. She would have died in less than 10 seconds. We are now hearing from former police dive supervisor Sergeant Lorna Dennison-Wilkins. Sergeant Dennison-Wilkins received a doctorate after completing a thesis relating to human body movements in inland waterways. She is an expert on what happens to a body after a person dies by drowning. She says that although the clothing Nikki was wearing would have given her some initial buoyancy, the air bubbles would have been removed by movement and Nikki's body would have sunk. The sergeant agrees that people can drown in relatively shallow water if the temperature is cold. She says that 44% of fatalities in water occur when someone had no intention of entering the water, for example, if they fell in accidentally. Dr. Adley, the coroner, has described Nikki as a holiday swimmer. He asked what it would be like to try to swim against a water speed of 1 metre per second. It would be almost impossible to swim against a current, Sergeant Dennison-Wilkins replied. You would have to go with the current and then find a place of safety. Now, before I move on with the rest of this video, I'd just like to point out that the only evidence throughout this inquest is that Nicola drowned. There's no evidence of when she died, or there was no evidence produced of what water she died in. Everything else was based on assumptions. Even these 4 people, now that's after been talking, they're basing it on a person that's drowned. It's still not about Nicola, really, because there's no evidence that Nicola went in there at the bench area. Only that her body, her cause of death was drowning. So they have to assume that Nicola fell in there at the bench and give their expert opinions on if Nicola had fell in at the bench, what would have happened. If they were asked all these questions outside of this case, as a general rule, to their expertise on these kind of questions, there would have been a lot more added to their statements, as they were just basing it on one thing, as Nicola had drowned. But if they were talking as a general rule of all people that drown, as some people do survive these situations. So in order for me to go through the police theory that Nicola had an accident, I may go back to the beginning and talk about the tennis ball. You see, at first police believed that Nicola had an accident while trying to retrieve the tennis ball. Now, this was going on for a whole week into the disappearance of Nicola. Every newspaper article had it out about the tennis ball. You see, they had no evidence of her falling into the river. And they didn't really go on about the harness at that stage because they really had it in their head that she fell while trying to retrieve this tennis ball. So the harness never came into question at all. That was halfway up the banking. You then had Emma White having to come out and do an interview to say that there was no tennis ball. You also had Louise Cunningham, Nicola's sister, had to put up a post. Louise said, "Please keep sharing my Nikki. Off the back of the latest police media update, please can I add, there is no evidence whatsoever that she has gone into the river. It's just a theory. Everyone needs to keep an open mind as not all CCTV and leads have been fully investigated. The police confirmed the case is far from over."
Let's just take you back to yesterday. So yesterday was a 7-day milestone. It was a roller coaster in itself. You wake up, still no news. Okay, we'd already planned the 7 days, a big media publicity. We were out there with the banners. So then to hear just in the afternoon that had driven awareness, influx of calls, that hope was ignited. I couldn't tell you the feeling like something's got to come of all this information. We then get the news bulletin and it comes up with this hypothesis, then that sinking feeling again. And I just wanted to quote, so what we're saying is, what struck a chord, she said the search continues to no avail, and then obviously a hypothesis is on limited information. And when we're talking about a life, we can't base it on a hypothesis. Surely we need this factual evidence. And like you've just both said, that's what the family and us are all holding on to, that we're actually no further on than sadly last Friday. We still have no evidence, and that's why we're out again in force. It's not frustrated, but you don't base life on a hypothesis, do you? You absolutely can have hypotheses, but then you need something to back that hypothesis up to become factual. And I think we just said, we talked to the family, they obviously discussed that with the family. We didn't believe it was going to go into a live news bulletin when it is this hypothesis. So, yeah. Willow used to love a tennis ball very much, but it used to disturb the walk, so they haven't had a tennis ball since way into last year. Obviously, a tennis ball, she loved the tennis ball, so she'd always be by you, pestering you for the ball. But it wasn't a nice walk when the dog's pestering, so the ball was definitely no ball.
Okay, well, that's really interesting. As a dog owner, I know how annoying it can be having dogs obsessing over balls. So you don't think there would have been a ball?
No.
Okay. And finally, what is your message today to people watching this who will share your anguish? They'll share the family's anguish and their desperation that perhaps things are narrowing down now in terms of getting Nikki back. What's your message?
Again, yesterday they said they haven't explored all the avenues. We've got footage missing from Garstang Road, which is just outside of the river, where you come into the gate for the walk. So we're appealing again for anybody that has the dash cam footage, any information on that. Then when we've explored that avenue, then hopefully the police can piece a bit more of the picture together. I know people will be coming out in the force today. We've had message after message and we thank you. We've got routes set up for people to do today. We've actually overnight I think you've already shared it, we've got this 10-foot illuminated box that actually drove from Blackpool to Preston last night. It's going to be driving around. It's going to be prominently in St Michael's today, just to raise that awareness. And if someone can just shed a little bit of light to give us some evidence, that's all we're asking.
And it's just a simple phone call, isn't it?
A simple phone call. Yeah. And nothing's too small, but then again, don't clog the lines with trivia. No.
And for you, you're not ruling anything out?
Not ruling anything out, no. And we have to. I've always said, my children, Nicky's children, we've got to carry that hope. But until we find something, we can't go and tell them we have a hypothesis.
It's going to be tough for the little girls this weekend, isn't it?
Very, very much so. And we've all been about the routine. So they're going to the clubs and doing what we normally do on a Saturday and just keeping them occupied.
Now, during the inquest, PC Thackeray described the scene of the riverbank where Nikki was last seen and using a series of photographs to point out the location and the bench where Nikki's phone was found. These pictures were taken to try show the slope down the banking and the river itself, he said. The images show the two areas of sloping, with the second much steeper than the first. PC Thackeray said that although the river level was higher than normal, there was around a 1 metre drop the day Nicky went missing. Pointing out a cut at the bottom of the steep banking, he suggests this could have been made by fishermen. Now, as we know, photos can be deceiving, so I'm going to show you a few photographs and see what you think. As you can see in this photograph, the slope looks like you could have a great roll down it. Here's Roger Jones, aka Ron, standing talking to someone right in front of the bench. Here's Paul Ansell and Peter Falden, standing on the slope. As you can see here, there's plenty of spaces and humps and bumps for people to stand on this slope. Here they are coming back up the slope. Notice the cameramen and all the other people there as well, as they reckon this is such a dangerous place that there's no spaces to stand there. You just roll down it and fall into the river. This is police and police divers standing on different ledges along that slope. Here they are in the big dip, standing around talking on the edge of the river, and as you can see there's a straight piece there to have a foothold. Here's a police diver bent down in the water where the stone area is in front of the steps. He's bent down, taking off his flippers. Here we have the diver climbing out of the river. As you can see, he has his flippers off. Here we have more divers and police standing around chatting on the ledge beside the edge of the river. Here's the area in front of those steps where all the stones are in the water. That's where the diver was able to stand, and he was bent down in that picture I showed you, taking off his flippers. This is PC Thackeray standing on those stones and pointing down the river. This is also a picture of PC Thackeray standing on those stones. And the reason I got those photographs is from his video. And you can show where the splash in the water where he got in, and you can actually see him standing on them stones. Take a look at this picture and look at the drop from the top of the bank to the river's edge. This is the picture zoomed in. Look at the drop. Remember I said at the start, police were trying to get people to believe that Nicola had fallen in accidentally while trying to retrieve the tennis ball. This is the image they had. Why would they think that Nicola had tried to reach down and knowing her arm wouldn't be long enough to fish out a cheap tennis ball, putting her life at risk? A tennis ball you could get anywhere, and she probably had loads of them at home. How stupid did they think Nicola was? Or how stupid did they think people are to believe their theory like this? You see, there was no marks on the riverbank. That's why they assumed that she was in a position like this that didn't make any marks. So then they had to move on to another theory to keep up the narrative that Nicola had went into the water at the bench. So the next thing then was Willow's harness. We were told that Willow's harness was found between the bench and the river's edge. So if you're looking at the photograph here, try picture it between it. I'm marking 2 X's here just to give you an idea of halfway between the bench and the river's edge. And actually it's even further towards the river in this picture.
And then the phone rang, and it was the school, and it was the receptionist at school, and she said, "Mr. Ansell, it's a bit of a weird one." Hello. So it's a bit of a weird one, but we found Willow and Nicky's phone on the bench, and the harness halfway down the embankment on the floor.
You see, none of us really know where the harness was, as everything's based on what Penny Fletcher had to say about the harness. And given that Roger Jones was the next person to find the harness, he found it on the bench. So either Penny picked up the harness and put it on the bench, or it was already on the bench and she just said it was halfway down the bank, or somebody came along and changed the position of the harness and didn't come forward, or Roger Jones himself picked up the harness and put it on the bench. But both Roger Jones and Penny said they didn't touch the harness. As we knew what had happened already, police never produced any evidence of the scene, as they didn't do any forensics at the scene and no photographic evidence was given of the scene. Somebody messed with this scene or tried to make it look a certain way, and this is not seen as a major red flag. So next scenario that the police wanted us to have in our heads, and the theory they wanted us to believe, was that from wherever the harness was dropped by Nicola, that Nicola had either slipped, rolled, went head over heels and ended up in the middle of the river. These are pictures of the annual cheese rolling competition, and this is the picture they want to envision of the accident that happened with Nicola Bulley. Each of these pictures here and scenarios of the falls that they'd be having, even if any of these had happened to Nicola at the top of that banking, she still wouldn't have had enough speed and momentum to end up in the middle of the river. It just wasn't that long enough of a distance to land her out in the middle of the river.
I mean, my view is, I've just come from the bench now, and again, below the bank where Nicola would have fallen in, it's about a foot deep onto rocks. So if she had fallen in, even if it was a foot higher, she would have landed actually on rocks, and she would have been able to hold on to them rocks. Yes, it's deep in the middle. It's about 3.5, 4 meters deep in the middle, but right at the bottom bank, I've sort of looked at it. If I fell in, I would land on rocks. And what we've got to look at here, Jeremy, is on day one, where Nicola's phone was actually found, the police thoroughly searched that area, underwater search team, and nothing was found. Yes, I deal with about 10 drownings a year. In 2016, we've done 16 in 8 weeks, unfortunately. But these people, they go to the bottom. You go to the bottom when you drown. You don't float. You sink to the bottom, and you tend to stay there. Even in a reasonably strong current, you don't go very far. You tend to drag along the bottom. And here, she's got to go right the way around the corner. What the key thing here is the police dive team were here that day, diving that area, and it was cleared. And since then, it was subsequently done again, and then it was searched by us with high frequency sonar. And there is nothing in that particular stretch of the water. And even if she had have got to the weir, she's got to get over the weir and under the weir that's all shallow and it's just a pile of rocks. So that's my view.
Well, if Nicola slipped down the bank, she would end up with a water just up probably to the top of her legs.
Oh.
If she went out into the middle, it's about 3.5, 4 meters deep. But to get down, the bench is quite a way back. So to actually get into the river, you would have to be pushed very hard or knocked out and shoved in the river. Or you, very unlikely that, the dog was dry here. So she hasn't, I don't believe that she's just slipped down the bank. She was a very cautious lady. Talking to the family, she was a creature of habit, absolute creature of habit. And from her Strava data, the family said, Heather and the family said, she does not ever go near that river. She's really cautious. She takes the same route every morning. Total creature of habit here. And this is what doesn't stack up. None of this stacks up at all.
So after a couple of weeks, police were under more pressure because people weren't believing that Nicola had fell into the river. And locals were starting to get afraid.
Even if my children weren't in the equation, just me walking out with the dogs, I think I'd be quite wary now. And because of where the bench is down there, the way it all happened, supposedly, where she just disappeared off this bench, if you've got your back turned, it makes you very, very wary.
Scared, to be honest. Yeah, makes you think. Like me personally, I am a dog walker as well. I do dog sitting and pet sitting and dog walks and stuff, and it's scary because it's like you think, oh, you can't even take your dog for a walk, you know, like without something happening, or you just don't expect it.
It's really touched me, this, a lot. I think a lot of women my age, and also because she's called Nikki, isn't she? I think her age could sort of, you know, sort of sympathise like with the family and, you know, her children especially. I can't imagine what they're going through.
So with all the locals being concerned, and then loads of people turning up in the area, trying to solve the case because they didn't trust the police judgment that Nicola had fell into the river. And these people were finding things like blood, I think it was in the top area of the field, and a stained glove, which the police have showed no evidence of testing these items or having any interest whatsoever of anything outside the fact that Nicola had fell into the river. Police were also feeling the pressure from journalists and ex-detectives and things like that. So next minute they came out with the whole vulnerabilities. Police stated that Nicola was suffering with perimenopause and had significant issues with alcohol. They faced a barrage of anger after releasing this information. It even went up to the Prime Minister. Now you have to wonder, why would they even release that information? Yes, release about vulnerabilities, but there was no need for them to go as far as these significant issues with alcohol and her private information of perimenopause, when that would have nothing to do with her going missing. This is the next image the police tried to portray as being Nicola, as having significant issues with alcohol, that her, as the victim, caused her own demise. You see, they lost the narrative on the tennis ball and lost the narrative on the harness. So now they had to portray her as something she was not, just to keep their narrative going, that Nicola had fallen into the river.
I'm PC 3410 Thackeray, Lancashire Constabulary, currently on secondment with the North West Police Underwater Search and Marine Unit. I've been asked to record some of the features of the river wire near to Allotment Lane in relation to the Nicola Bulley inquest. Today is Tuesday the 4th of April 2023. The time by my watch is 11:07. Currently stood at the bench where we believe Nicola was last before she may have entered the water. As you can see, as you go down to the river, it is quite a steep slope. The river is probably down about half a metre from the day when we attended, when she went missing. As you can get to the bottom, you can see there's quite a large step down into the water. And hopefully you can see on the screen there's a pile of rocks. Those rocks constitute a wall that goes pretty much vertically straight down in the water to around 4 meters of depth, and then as you go out across the river it slopes gently upwards with a sandy bottom towards the far bank. If I get into the water, It doesn't look like it's flowing very fast at all at the moment. On the day in question, you could see there was a steady flow downstream. At the moment we're above the weir, and the whole time we were here searching, the water was flowing downstream towards the weir. Once I get into the water here, you can see there are some trees that overhang into the water, but it's fairly clear at the point of entry on both sides. There's nothing that could have stopped her, and you can see as we look back the wall that, as I said, goes pretty much straight down. It looks like it's man-made and to stop the erosion at the corner of the river. Now I'm into the middle of the river now, and it is pushing me downstream towards the weir. Probably around about walking pace, and it was certainly flowing a little bit faster on the day in question. On the day in question, the water was 4 degrees Celsius. To somebody who's not in a dry suit, that would feel very, very, very cold, almost freezing. And if it fell in accidentally, I think the cold water shock would have probably taken effect, which causes you to gasp. It can cause your muscles to seize, so you can't swim properly. Underneath us now, as I dived on the first day, I know there are about 3 trees on the bottom, about 3.5 meters down here. We searched all around those trees and there was nothing caught up in them. So it's my belief that if she did fall in, she was probably floating and being pushed along in the flow. Once you get a little bit further down, you can probably see there's an island in the middle, and the first real snagging point onto the right there, which are the trees hanging into the water. Again, on the bottom here, it's very sandy. The water is quite murky, however we could see when we were on the bottom between about 1 meter and 2 meters using a torch. It gently slopes up to the left where it reaches the far bank, and on the right hand side it continues to be that wall. This far down I believe there was a bit of a ledge about 1 meter under the water before the ledge came out, probably 1.5 meters before dropping down again to about 3.5 meters. As we get further down towards the these trees, I remember the water, the bottom started to slope up, and I've just reached the bottom now. So quickly, you can see how quickly it slopes up. I am now standing up in the water. It's about 1.5 meters deep here, and this part was all searched on the night, as we could see through it using torches. I don't know if you can see on the screen, you can see the bottom here. It's completely flat, a few rocks, and the first place you could have had a body to be caught up really would be this tree. Obviously this was searched, there was no trace. As we move further towards where this island is, we get into about 100 meters from the point of entry, or the perceived point of entry. Once again it gets deeper and deeper, and this was dived on a subsequent day. We searched around the front of the island here, and nothing was found on the actual day. I'm currently off the bottom again, so it's over 1.5 meters deep here. I think from memory and dived further down later, it's about 3 meters deep just past, sorry, it's about 2 meters deep just past this island. And then once again we start coming up to the first right hand bend. The water starts to shallow out, and very shortly I imagine I'll be able to touch the floor again. I'm not swimming along at all here, I'm just letting the flow take me. Like I say, it's a slower flow than on the day in question, but it's still happily walking pace if you can see us moving along the bank. Again, you can see a small overhang of trees as the river bends to the right, still not touching the bottom. It's around 2 meters deep here. The bottom continues to be sandy and flat with a few rocks on it. I know there was a tree here as well that was located on sonar that was dived and searched all around. And just as we get to the apex of the corner, my feet have just touched the ground now, so it's probably around 1.5 meters deep here. Again, nothing on the bottom at all that would hold anything up. No overhanging trees that could have really been a snag. And we searched in a line on the night she went missing, all the way from here down to the weir, as it gets shallower and shallower from here. Now looking about 1 meter's depth. Hopefully you can see on the screen, you can see the bottom. And there's nothing on it. Get around the corner, because it gets shallower and slightly narrower, the water starts to pick up in pace as you get towards the weir. The exit of this corner is about 200 meters from the point of entry. Again, if you can see the bottom, completely sandy, nothing there that will cause any kind of snag. And we're confident on the day in question that she wasn't in this area. The depth across the river, which I think is about 20 meters wide, is fairly consistent. Completely flat here, man-made banks on both sides. Yeah, and you can see there are some slightly bigger rocks, probably fallen away from the side. But all of these were searched, and there was nobody here on the day in question. You can probably see from the state of the river now, like I said, it's picking up in speed. If I was to sit down in this water now, you can see it's taking me along quite a bit faster. Let's try and measure it from the side. It's now probably at a slow jogging pace. As we come around the corner, you can clearly see the weir in front of us. The weir is around about 300 metres from the point of entry. As you get towards it, water now is shin deep on me. We do think it's down a little bit from the day in question, but if you're floating, it's still more than enough water to push you along. Again, all of this was searched on the night in question by officers wading in a line, and we could see the whole width of the river. As you get to the weir itself, hopefully you can see there's a lip, but there's a lot of water going over it. Even though the water is now down from where it was on the day, it comfortably pushed me over, float over the top, and straight into the faster flowing water at the bottom. It's not powerful enough, there's not a big enough drop on the other side to stop you. Again, we did search the other side of that weir to make sure there was nothing trapped in it. As I stand up now, it's waist deep, flowing faster. The bottom is rocky, difficult to stand up on, and it does shallow to here where I'm about knee deep. Now below the weir, this river is tidal, and so it can flow in both directions. Again, when we were here, it was all flowing downstream on the day, but I believe at the time she went missing it would have been low tide, so before we arrived there would have been a high tide that pushed things back up, and then it would have started ebbing away as we started diving. I believe the fire brigade were searching downstream, and they were here before we arrived. We arrived about 3 PM and started diving 4 PM. If you look to the left, you can see there's a sandy bank. Over to the right, you can see there are some trees where someone potentially could have been caught up. These weren't searched by us on the day, but I believe the fire brigade were in a boat and we're searching in and around all of these snag hazards. Still currently waist deep, and there are some more trees on this right hand bank that potentially could have been a snag hazard. In the middle of the river here there is a shallow sand bank. There's a channel that runs to the right and to the left where it's deeper. I'm just coming onto the sandbank now. I'm coming up from waist deep to shin deep, but on either side slightly deeper. So here I'm waist deep. You can see again man-made rocks on the wall on the way down. On the river right, on river left, a sandy bank. I come over this shallow sand bank and back into the deeper water in the channel on the other side of it, which is now around chest deep on this side. It's around about 400 metres now from the point of entry, heading down towards the bridge, which is around about 500 metres away. And the water here, as we exit the corner, is deeper. I'm off bottom. around about 2 meters. Again, I'm not swimming, I'm just being pushed along by the current, which is at a slow walking pace. You can see a large tree overhanging the water here, where potentially somebody floating could be caught. If I go over to it, just put my legs under it, then pretty sure there's not a lot that's actually hanging into the water. It definitely could stop you if you came into it, but there's nothing underneath these branches that are on the surface, nothing coming down into the water. And again, still steep sided with a man-made banking.
First of all, I'd like to say that when the inquest was looming, I had very high expectations for this part of the inquest. As with all the research I'd done, all the videos I watched Professor Caroline Roberts' video 3 times. I thought a lot of our questions would be answered, and I thought that even Peter Faldin, he would be proved right. And I'm sure if they had Caroline Roberts testing it, Peter Faldin would have been proved right. And I'd done all this research before I even started this channel. When Maria Solares first released her video of the police back in the river, I thought, surely that can't be it with regards to testing the river. I thought that's just police carrying their own tests. I never thought that a coroner would be relying solely on a police diver actually testing the river. And what test he carried out was like absolutely atrocious and very little testing. And as I said, I had high expectations after seeing how some professors and stuff really carry out research on rivers and how bodies come to be where they are and how they travel and all that sort of thing. I feel like it was a massive letdown, not only for Nicola, her family, but everyone else that followed what was happening with this case. I just want to read out a few tweets from Mark Williams Thomas in regards to the police diver PC Thackeray. Interesting and disappointing that it took police so long to do a video. Would have been much more helpful and evidential if it had been done much closer to the day of disappearance. Police diver's view is that Nicola Bulley went into the water at the bench. That's just a guess. Video shows officer floating and walking in the water. Water very shallow on approach to the weir. Also would have been shallow on the day as well. Below the weir, river is tidal, and on the day it was high tide, so pushing back towards the weir and the bench. In the inquest, it said that Nicola couldn't swim against the current, but also her body, if it was there, wouldn't be able to push past the tide. The tide would have brought her, if she was there, back up towards the weir. Her body would have been seen. There were so many people all over that area. Her body would have been seen. Next tweet. Diving officer video continued. Officer saying 3.5 minutes after moving with the water flow, he reaches a place where he can stand. Estimate current at 2 knots when video taken. Diver says flow quicker on the day of disappearance. Now we know that's a lie, because if you go and look at the video that Pandora's box made about the flows and the height of the river on the day Nicola disappeared, PC Thackeray lied about those measurements. It would actually have been slower on the day Nicola disappeared. Also, when I was watching the video, he said that the current was bringing him at a slow walking pace, and it was 1 meter per second. Now, looking at the video, you can actually see that there's no way that he was going from the bench area to the island that was sticking out in the middle, that he was going 1 meter per second. So I decided to do some calculations on what he had said. He said from the bench area to that little island that was sticking out in the middle was 100 meters. From the point that he started floating from the middle of the river to where the island was, it took him 4 minutes. From his statement, to get from point A to B in the 100 meters, he would have done it in 100 seconds if he was going 1 meter a second. It actually took 240 seconds. He's saying that it would have been 3.6 kilometers per hour that Nicola's body would have been travelling. And at his 1 meter per second, it would have meant that Nicola travelled 1.5 miles in 26 minutes. And plus, taking into account that the river was tidal that day, it would have been pushing her back towards the weir. Now, when he got closer to the weir and he tested the water again to see what the flow was like, obviously it would be faster there because it's getting closer to the weir to pick up momentum. He said it was like a slow jogging pace, but that looked more like the 1 meter per second. Police diving expert now given evidence as to where he believes Nicola Bulley had entered the water. It was approximately 1 meter drop from the bank near to the bench to the river's edge. Police diving expert now contradicting himself as to the drop, now saying it's more like 2 meters, not 1 meter. He has clearly not measured it. Did PC Thackeray do any proper measurements that day? As he didn't measure the bank properly, he didn't measure the water levels, and he also didn't measure how long it takes in the current properly. Now, thanks to Maria Solars for her video, her footage showing the divers back in the river, we know that there was 2 divers in the river and 2 of them had got over the weir. And her video shows the second diver after getting over the weir. She didn't capture PC Thackeray getting over the weir, but she did witness the second diver getting over the weir. He had to lift himself up on top, swung his legs over to sit on the top and pushed himself off. Then he floated on his back for a bit in the water below the weir. The start of her video, you can see him off to the right a bit, still on his back. She said it was nothing like PC Thackeray had said. The flow wasn't enough to push the second officer over. But if you study PC Thackeray's video, you can actually see him lift his leg out of the water and put it over the weir, and then lift the second leg out of the water and over the weir to help himself over the weir. If Nicola had died in the river that day and her body had have actually floated up to the weir, as I said before in my previous videos, her position would have been legs and arms dangling down into the river. There's no way her body could have floated over that weir in that position unless it was extremely heavy floods. Neither PC Thackeray or the second diver, was in that position trying to get over the weir. Now this picture is when a body sinks, which if Nicola had fell in there, she would have sank, and this is the position she would have been in, and she would have been found that day. Exactly what Peter Falden had said. But if she was in the actual floating position, which wouldn't happen for some time in a river, this would be the position that she would be in. Exactly what Jason Rothwell had described when he found Nicola's body. He said it was only an area of about a foot he could see, and that was the top of her head. You see, when all gases are released from the body and the person has been dead for some time, and even if you threw a body into the river after they've been dead for some time, they're still going to assume this position because of time, and the gas has already been released and decomposition and that. But police want you to believe that Nicola was already in this position and had travelled 1.5 miles on the very same day that she supposedly drowned in the river. Also, both divers were alive when they entered the bottom of the weir. A dead weight at the bottom of that weir would have been swirling around and around before being expelled out through it. Both divers were able to manoeuvre their way out of that. I'm going to show you some stuff on weirs just to explain that.
Okay, so today we are in Newbury Town Centre, and this is the 4th day of our campaign for water safety and drowning prevention week. Now, we've been going around the county trying to increase knowledge or awareness about the concerns that we have with how many people are drowning in UK rivers. But what you can see here, one of the watchers at Caversham Road Fire Station, Red Watch, they've designed what we're calling a drown tank. And the purpose of this is to show people exactly how you drown or why you drown around a water feature such as a weir. Now, if you have a look down here at the moment, we've got quite a lot of water flow, and this is just trying to replicate a weir in flood conditions when lots of water is coming. So what we're trying to show people is that if you were to drop in the weir here, under normal circumstances, or more not, you're more likely, just giving the helping hand over there, you'll just come straight out. So you'll just pop in and go over the weir, and it'll come out. Okay? But the big difference now is that if we change the level of the water, now the first thing you can see here is there's a big drop coming down here, and the other big problem we've got is there are a lot of bubbles in the water. This makes the water sort of very light. It's got a lot of buoyancy in here with the bubbles, and that affects how you can swim and get out. The real big difference now is if you put us back in here and you go over the weir, up in there again, instead of you being pushed out of the weir in the water, you get caught up in here, and it gets like a washing machine effect, and you simply can't get yourself out the water. And even if you think, oh, I'm a good swimmer, and if I got out to here I would be safe, then it isn't either. It will just keep pulling you back in. And what we call this is recirculating water, and that will drag you back in, and it will keep dunking you underneath. So on the both sides of here, on there and on there, it will keep pulling you back and then keep drowning. And of course, with the cold water effect that you have, with your muscles getting tired, with your hyperventilating, your heart rate's increasing, eventually you will drown. You'll start taking in water and you get tireder, and this effect will just keep pinning you there. So it's quite visual. It's just a complete change in what happens when you change water levels. We're telling people never ever to jump in our waterways. Don't ever go around any of the water features on the Thames, such as locks and weirs. And this is now showing you why we don't want people under there.
The hydrometry and telemetry team measure the river flows at key points along many of our rivers here in the northwest. We are usually interested in flows at all levels, from drought right through to flood levels. We are also responsible for maintaining the equipment on site used for generating flood warnings, which can be seen on the Environment Agency's web pages. When the team are called out to measure river levels and flow rates to inform flood warning information, they use technical equipment suspended at different levels under and above the water. The sounding cable, which is used to guide the equipment, is usually 4 mm thick and made of high tensile wire. This allows it to support 100 kg sinker weights. The wire is under great tension and could cause serious harm if collided with and can be difficult to see. Weirs, by their nature, create areas of deep water and often with strong currents. Other equipment in and around weirs may not be immediately apparent, especially when river levels are higher and could cause harm. The slopes of weirs are slippy places and with unforgiving hard surfaces. The best advice we can give is avoid them. As you can see, even though the water around the weir appears relatively calm, they can be extremely dangerous places, as the circulation patterns on the downstream side can submerge a person indefinitely in a washing machine-like effect.
I also want to show you a test that Peter Falden had carried out in the river in front of the bench area. A diving expert who led a search for Nicola Bulley claims he has video proof she did not fall into the river. Dive expert Peter Fallen says a clip shows the river is slow moving, which means she would have sunk very quickly. He claims this means Nicola, 45, would have remained near where she disappeared on January the 27th if she had fallen in. I'm just getting back to some of the comments that PC Thackeray had said at the inquest. The coroner asked him, if you were in the water and trying to climb out, would it be possible to find a foothold on the bricks? PC Thackeray replies, no, not at all. It's very difficult to get out of the water here. But I say, all Nicola had to do was get up onto the stones where the edge of the riverbank is and wait for help there, because as long as she was out of the water, she would have acclimatised and she would have been a bit miserable, but she would have been fine. The coroner also asked, if you have fallen and gone over the edge of the steep section, are you going to stop before you hit the water? PC Thackeray replies, no, you would just go into the water. But we know she would have just fell down in front of the bank where all them stones were. She wasn't going to make it out into the middle of the river. She wasn't on a swinging out into the middle of the river. And she wasn't on a slide that would have brought her out onto the middle of the river. PC Thackeray also said, there is nothing to grab hold of to help yourself back out. But that's another lie, PC Thackeray, because she had loads of stones to grab onto to get herself out. And it was sloping, not a straight drop. She would have been able to climb and put her feet on the stones and her hands on the stones, making her way out of the river. PC Thackeray told the inquest that it's his belief that if she did fall in, she was probably floating and being pushed along with the flow. But they couldn't get an expert to agree with him on this, as he's just a diver. He's not like well trained in the behaviour in water like some other divers. So because they couldn't get anyone else to agree with him, they just got one person, but only gave them a short amount of speaking time, and she didn't agree with him. She said that she would have sunk. You see, the way they didn't give her much time to speak and didn't ask certain questions, because they know she would have pointed a lot of things out that PC Thackeray had said. It's just like the fact that there was another police officer up on the bank that wasn't in the river. He could have took video footage of this whole thing, but they didn't want you to see the video from the outside looking down. They just wanted you to see what they wanted. My opinion on PC Thackeray is that probably about 2 hours before he went to test the river, he probably read a book on how to test rivers and probably picked one element out of that book and ran with it before even finishing the whole book. He is a liar, and he is just one of the many reasons we don't trust the police anymore. So moving on to Professor Tipton.
Scientists use the word hypothesize. Most other people use the word guess, but it sounds a bit posher to say hypothesize.
Oops, Professor Tipton. The police won't like that. Professor Tipton said at the inquest, the lethal dose of water into the lungs with fresh water is 2 litres. In that first breath, for a person of similar weight to Nicky, you would have taken in 1 to 2 litres, so it would only maybe take 1 or 2 breaths to cross the lethal dose. I already know, after looking at everything, that Nicola wasn't in that water for 23 days. And I 100% believe that. So let's entertain the charade for a moment. Professor Tipton doesn't know whether Nicola died from cold water shock. There's no evidence of that on her body. What Professor Tipton fails to tell people at the inquest, mainly because the coroner doesn't ask the question, it's 44% of the people that are in that situation with cold shock response survive. That's 44%. I'll show that in a clip shortly. He went on to say, you're absolutely preoccupied with the challenge you were being presented with. And those first seconds in the water, people really aren't considering anything else. We have heard of people talk about routes to grab onto and points of safety, but you would not be thinking of things like that. Again, he's guessing, as he doesn't know what way Nicola would react if she fell into the water, and she wouldn't have fell very far anyway. He said, you are preoccupied with attempting to hold your breath and get back to the surface. Professor Tipton said, at the temperature the river wire was on the day Nicky went missing, a person would lose consciousness within around 25 seconds. You see the way he changed it from Nicky to a person, instead of saying it was Nicky that died. Also saying would have instead of could have, as would have implies it did happen. Could have means that a certain amount of people survive that situation, which they do. Dr. Morgan then says that if someone has taken an initial gasp from the cold water shock and then goes underwater, the length of time they would be able to hold their breath is 10 seconds at best, and most likely 1 to 2 seconds. Again, that doesn't prove that happened to Nicky. And even if Nicky had been in that water, 44% of people survived that initial shock. Professor Tipton says that if Nicky had fallen in where it is suggested, then there is a very good chance that the initial gasp would have happened under the water, which meant unconsciousness would have been far quicker. You see, he had no evidence that that had happened to Nicola. So he's just given a guess as a certain amount of people that does happen to. But there's no evidence that that happened to Nicola. Professor Tipton said, "In my opinion, given the nature of the likely entry into the water, at a speed down a steep slope, I think Nikki had a gasp response under the water, which initiated the drowning response very quickly. She would have died in less than 10 seconds. That seems extraordinary to me. Less than 10 seconds. After everything we're after seeing throughout this case. I mean, he was there when PC Thackeray was given his evidence. And he would have heard the other diver disagreeing with him. I mean, could he not see the red flags there? Imagine putting your name to something like that. And with all the inconsistencies throughout it. Like, that's a big risk to take on a guess. Then the inquest heard from former police dive supervisor Sergeant Lorna Dennison-Wilkins. She had received a doctorate after completing a thesis relating to human body movements in inland waterways. She is an expert on what happens to a body after a person dies by drowning. She says that although the clothing Nikki was wearing would have given her some initial buoyancy, the air bubbles would have been removed by movement and Nikki's body would have sunk. The sergeant agrees that people can drown in relatively shallow water if the temperature is cold. But she says that 44% of fatalities in water occur when someone had no intention of entering the water, for example, if they fell in accidentally. You see, there you have it. An expert in what happens to bodies in water said her body would have sunk. You see, they couldn't get an expert to not say that. You see, they weren't going to give that task to someone like Lorna or someone like Caroline Roberts, as they would have proved that Nicola had never went into that water. Was there good money in it for PC Thackeray? Or was it just pure stupidity? The next question to Sergeant Dennison-Wilkins was from Dr. Adley, and this really put my back up. Just before he asks her his question, he describes Nikki as a holiday swimmer. How insulting is that? Actually, I will rectify that for you, Dr. Adley. Nikki's friend Tilly not only said was Nikki a strong swimmer, she was an incredibly strong swimmer. He asks what it would be like to try and swim against a water speed of 1 meter per second. She replies, it would be almost impossible to swim against the current. You would have to go with the current and then find a place of safety. You see, that's not exactly true, as all Nicola had to do was go to the side where the stones were, against the bank, and she would have been safe, if she had been in there at all. Also, I'd like to point out that the slowest moving part of the river is at the bottom. That's the slowest part. And each layer, as it gradually goes up, it gets faster. And the fastest part of the river is at the very top. I'm going to show you a video clip of what I mean, that Nicola only had to go to the side of the river to get out. She didn't have to swim upstream against the current. As you see here, this woman swings out into the middle of the river and into the current. And the current didn't take her away. It was a stronger current than Nicola had to deal with. and was able to make her way back to the side of the river, exactly where Nicola would have ended up, at the rocks. They also spoke at the inquest about her losing consciousness and dying within 10 seconds. Yet that then is contradicted by saying that the clothing would give her initial buoyancy. How could she die within 10 seconds if that's the case? You also have the fact that they mentioned her heart would have been pumping faster and under more distress, and sometimes it causes heart attacks. But Nicola's heartbeat at the highest was 100 beats per minute, and that's actually normal. It's not anything major. And I know for a fact that when my heart gets in serious distress, it gives off cardiac enzymes into the blood. And none of that showed up in Nicola's post-mortem. And now I want to show you some videos on people falling into cold water. I'm playing this again just to show you where this guy ends up after coming a long way down, sliding down, where he ends up, not way further out in the middle. This one is in the UK and the air temperature is 4 below freezing.
The phone is right there. Look.
Dude, your phone's ruined. Don't jump in there. This is a bad idea.
Let's swim in February, buddy. No, well, I think
your phone is wrecked. It's not worth it.
it's not that deep.
Right. I just gotta see this motherfucker. Is it?
It's not that far. You can swim back. Just do it. Did you get it? Yeah! There you go. Yeah, he is
Now for some accidental falls into cold water.
Oh my God.
Okay, some background here. This is not me in the kayak. A viewer sent me this, and it is the scariest piece of fishing video that I have ever watched. And the conditions, west-northwest wind 25 gusting to 40, air temperature 50 degrees, but the really critical thing here, water temperature 48 degrees. This is Raritan Bay, New Jersey. And that water temperature is critical because, you know what, in about 5 minutes, you're going to lose your ability to do anything with your hands. Exhaustion or unconsciousness in 30 to 60 minutes, death in 1 to 3 hours. But he's out here early in the morning. The odds of being seen are very low. then again. All right, he told me he was not wearing a life jacket, so no PFD. He is wearing waders. Very bad in a kayak. The kayak itself it's just a basic department store kayak. This is not something that's going to give a lot of stability. This is just a bad situation. On top of that, he's incredibly distracted here. All he can think about, and he told me this, was getting the selfie. And so he's got to log into his phone. He's got to set up the self timer. I can tell you, I've edited out where he's logging into his phone, putting his code in and everything. And while he's doing that, he's not paying attention to the conditions. So I've communicated with this guy. He's not a jerk. He's not stupid. He knows exactly what he did wrong. He listed all the things to me that he did wrong. He knows. He wants other people to see this so that nobody else gets overly excited about the fishing and finds himself in the position that this guy's going to find himself in. Okay, this frame really spells it out. You can see his distance from the beach. You can see the size of the waves, and people who are around kayakers know they do not show up well. Nobody's going to see this guy. He told me he really was having trouble catching his breath once he grabbed onto the kayak. He just was afraid to let go. He wasn't going to try and upright the kayak, and this is very bad. Miraculously, somebody on the shore saw him go over, called the police. The police got to him in about 30 minutes. It's just mind-boggling. So good job to that bystander and the cops for getting out there so fast.
This next story is about Air Florida Flight 90 that crashed into the 14th Street Bridge of Washington, D.C.
Washington, D.C. was used to an occasional winter snowstorm. But on January 13th, 1982, the city found itself in the midst of a blizzard that by noon had blanketed the nation's capital with nearly 12 inches of snow. Just before 3 p.m., National Airport was reopened. The tower radioed the captain and said he was in 11th place for takeoff. Regulations required that planes that had been sitting out in the storm and collecting snow receive extra de-icing, a pressurized mixture of hot water and antifreeze. While they sat on the tarmac, the pilot and first officer made a final check of the aircraft's systems.
Pitot heat. On. Anti-ice. Off.
The pilot, who previously had some unsatisfactory grades on proficiency checks, failed to activate the engine de-icers.
Warning panel.
This oversight meant that slush and frozen debris would remain in the engines, hampering a probe vital to monitoring engine power.
All right, ready to taxi.
Just a little more than an hour after its scheduled departure, Flight 90 was cleared for takeoff.
When we started down the runway, it seemed very routine.
But it wasn't that routine. The captain and the first officer had only flown together for less than 18 hours, and their experience in bad weather was minimal.
Immediately after leaving the ground, the plane started to shake. When the passenger turned around and looked at me, he looked like he was looking to me for reassurance, and I kind of shrugged my shoulders and tightened my seatbelt, thinking, everything's okay. I really didn't know what was happening.
The captain advanced the throttle, but the plane wasn't responding normally.
I don't think that's right. Yes, it is.
Because the pilot forgot to activate the internal engine de-icers, a probe had frozen. Unbeknownst to them, they were operating with only 70% of available power. The plane was not climbing quick enough. The pilot tried to coax it. The frozen aircraft could not achieve altitude.
Oh, there's flying! Larry, we're going down! Look out!
National Airport is very close to the heart of Washington, D.C., and the 14th Street Bridge is one of the busiest thoroughfares. But because of the snowstorm this day, government offices and schools had closed early, so traffic on the bridge was extra heavy. And then the unimaginable happened.
Everybody bend over and touch. Bend over and touch.
Get down, put your head down. Put your head down.
At 4:01 p.m., after being airborne for only 24 seconds, Air Florida 90, with a total of 79 passengers and crew on board, slammed into the 14th Street Bridge. It sheared the tops off several vehicles and broke into sections as it crashed into the icy water of the Potomac River. Commuter Lenny Skutnik didn't see the crash, but the commotion on the 14th Street Bridge got his attention.
We're probably halfway across the bridge and noticed some people looking over the guardrail. As soon as we got within view of the river, we could see what was going on. It's obvious that some type of aircraft had crashed. There's debris and broken ice. It was a mess.
The plane had carried 26,000 pounds of Jet A fuel, which emptied into the river, but there was no evidence of fire. Incredibly, there appeared to be survivors in the water. Passengers Alice Darden, Bird Hamilton, Nikki Felch, and Joe Stiley, along with flight attendant Kelly Duncan, were floating amongst the debris. All had been sitting in the back of the plane.
I don't remember an actual impact where I remember hitting. I just remember 1 minute sitting in my jump seat, and then the next instant, I was somewhere else, and I started moving my body and just bobbed to the surface of the water.
It took 15 minutes for the Park Police helicopter to arrive at the bridge. When pilot Don Usher and medic Gene Windsor had left their hangar, visibility was so bad that Usher had to use the tops of streetlights as a guide. But as it turned out, they got a lucky break.
Right as we arrived at the 14th Street Bridge, the weather broke. And just for about 10 or 15 minutes, the ceiling lifted up, the snow stopped blowing, and we could see the whole scene from National Airport all the way up to the 14th Street Bridge. And then the ice became very obvious. We could see that something had hit the river, shattered the ice in all directions, and then there was one spot where there was very little ice, and there was a fuselage, what appeared to be some piece of an aircraft with people hanging onto it.
Only Usher and Windsor had a full view of the disaster below. No one knew how many people were injured or dead on the bridge. Nor if the 6 people visible in the 34-degree water were the only survivors of Flight 90. Shortly after takeoff from Washington, D.C.'s National Airport, Air Florida's Flight 90 crashed into the 14th Street Bridge. As the plane went down, it toppled a truck and sliced the roofs off several cars, killing 4 people. Out of 79 passengers and crew on board the plane, only 6 survived the crash. They were now clinging to life in the frozen Potomac River.
I was really kicking my legs and doing everything that I thought would be the right thing to do to keep myself moving, because it just was so painful to be in that freezing water. I was really thinking, I can't help anybody else. There was a woman next to me. She had a life jacket in her hand. I opened it with my mouth. It was in no way any kind of a heroic effort.
Rescue and medical teams fought their way through the immobilized traffic to reach the bridge and the riverbank. They quickly realized they had no way of getting to the stranded survivors in the water. Emergency rescue teams worked frantically to help the injured on the bridge.
Chris has to move back now, too.
Down below in the river, the situation was becoming even more critical. The survivors had been in the 34-degree water for over 20 minutes. Windsor and Usher had done all that they could.
The total time from our arrival on scene until the last victim was put on shore was 10 minutes. To us in the aircraft, it seemed like 3 hours.
We got back to the hangar. I called my wife at home. Then I started telling her about the 6th man that we could not rescue. And I just busted out crying right at that point because unable to effect this rescue. And I still get choked up about it, really.
While the survivors were out of the icy water, they still weren't out of danger.
No, we are full. We have to find someplace up. I'm maxed out. I'm gonna need some more help back in here.
They were suffering from multiple injuries and severe exposure. Bringing someone back from a hypothermic state has risks of its own. The horrendous crash of Air Florida's Flight 90 into Washington, D.C.'s 14th Street Bridge on a snowy January day had put the staff at National Orthopedic Hospital into disaster mode. They were told that a large passenger plane had crashed. Survivors from the plane and injured commuters from the bridge were on their way. Dr. Gerard Ng, an orthopedic surgeon, was on call.
Our disaster drill was such that we set up the lobby of the hospital as the primary area. The emergency room wouldn't be nearly big enough to be a triage area.
Dr. Richard Schwartz was chief of medicine and the medical disaster coordinator.
We had absolutely no idea of what we were going to encounter that day. We didn't know how many had been killed on the plane or how many had been rescued.
In addition to the 5 plane crash survivors, Lenny Skutnik and Roger Olean, the 2 civilian rescuers who had plunged into the water to help save them, were also brought in.
My immediate reaction was, oh my Lord, if they're bringing 7 at a time, we were going to be overwhelmed very early because it was a small hospital, 125 beds. The sad part about it was that was the first and last ambulance that we saw with patients.
The survivors were suffering from multiple injuries and severe hypothermia.
Extremely hypothermic. I don't have vital signs on anybody.
The overwhelming reaction was how cold these people were. I don't think they were feeling pain really from their fractures. They were feeling the pain of hypothermia.
Flight attendant Kelly Duncan was the only crew member to survive the crash.
I didn't really know of any injuries that I had. I didn't feel pain. I remember shaking and shaking and shaking and just my body just being uncontrollable.
Her temperature had sunk to 81 degrees. She was hovering near death.
Hypothermia is a big problem because the body begins to shut down, and the major aspect of that problem is actually rewarming. We couldn't warm them from the outside because then their core temperature would still remain cold and there would be a differential, and that can cause electrical instability in the heart. You can have cardiac arrest, cardiac standstill.
Bear with me here, honey, okay? Honey, we're going to put a tube down your throat. I need you to help me here.
So we ended up warming the patients by running warm salt water through their stomachs to warm their core temperature.
In addition to hypothermia, most of the survivors had sustained multiple fractures.
Can I get somebody to call X-ray? We need some stat neck and back films down here, spine films. I need a nurse out here.
These proved to be relatively simple to treat.
The amazing thing was these patients were in shock both from the water and from their trauma. We could pretty much manage their fractures right there without any anesthesia or anything because they were basically anesthetized from the cold water. So we stabilized the fractures, put them in splints, and basically moved them out of that area in a fairly quick period of time.
Alice Darden and Nikki Felch stabilized overnight and eventually made full recoveries. But Joe Stiley and Bert Hamilton required extensive physical therapy to regain their movement.
It was surprising to me that anybody survived that crash, and I think the most noteworthy thing to me was at least 3 of the individuals, 2 of whom I saw, were in the brace position.
Volunteer rescuers Roger Olean and Lenny Skutnik were treated for hypothermia and released that evening. After 5 days, Kelly Duncan was able to leave intensive care. Because of shock, she did not realize what had happened to her until she heard a news report on television.
I heard him say, Air Florida. And then I heard him say the fact that we had hit a bridge and that so many people had died and they were still recovering bodies. And I just remember just tears just rolling down my face and just filling up my ears because I think that was just the first time that it really registered what exactly had happened, the magnitude of it.
4 commuters died from the crash into the bridge. Out of 79 passengers and crew on board Air Florida Flight 90, only 6 survived the crash. Through the extraordinary efforts of medic Gene Windsor and pilot Don Usher, 5 eventually made it home.
I'm a helicopter pilot who flew a mission, did what I had to do, got through it, and flew back to the hangar and moved on to the next thing. The hero is the person who's never expected to do it and then does it. Not the person that's paid to do it, not the person that does it and they're trained to do it and they're expected to do it. The hero is the person who it's inside and you don't know it's there until it happens.
So that just proves my point that some people can survive the initial shock response. So everyone, I'm going to leave it there. I think I've proved my point that Nicola was never in that river until she was placed in afterwards. So many lies being told throughout the inquest, it's shocking. I hope you go over to see Maria Solar's video again, the one she took at the river when the police went back to the river, and just look at it again at the diver at the bottom of the weir. I'll leave a link to Maria's channel in the description. Thank you, Maria, for replying to my comment. I also hope you'll go over to Pandora's Box and watch the video she done on the river levels and the lies that PC Thackeray had told. I'll leave a link to the channel in the description. Thanks, Pandora's Box. I'm going to finish this video out with some music and also some pictures and that of the whole search effort that was put into that river. And I really think you need to watch the rest of the video just to get a feel for the amount of searching of that river. There's no way she wouldn't have been found in the river. And if you see these all put together, it'll make sense. It will start with fire and rescue as they were first on the scene. And they searched all the banks and anything that was sticking out or overhanging. And then the police divers came along and they searched through the night as well with torches in the river and walked in lines anywhere they could walk in the river searching for Nicola. And then it went on to Peter Falden. We want justice for Nicola Bulley.